you're completely right. Some of the largest human rights violations currently taking place are access to food, access to water, housing, land, and the impact, not so much that it didn't exist before COVID, but it's certainly been exacerbated and highlighted in South Africa at a much more rapid rate than I think people thought initially. A lot of people coming out of the woodwork saying, I can't believe this is where we are in South Africa. But the fact is that in terms of violations, this happened for many, many years before COVID actually was declared a pandemic and a disaster in South Africa. It's just that the pandemic obviously highlighted the stark inequalities in South Africa and obviously exacerbated it at a much more rapid rate. So, for example, the issue of access to food has been highlighted through the pandemic to such a rate that we are talking about millions of people now who are starving every day in South Africa. In the Eastern Cape, you've got, close to over 200 communities who don't have access to clean potable water, access to land. Evictions were taking place in Cape Town. You can just see that, these violations are, although will continue and happening before the pandemic, are now becoming at a much higher violations occurring on a daily basis during the COVID-19 pandemic.
We also learned, Lucien, of some of the increases, of course, as you speak about how these elements and challenges were already pre-existing but exacerbated during the face of COVID-19. But we know and learned, looking at statistics, that cases of gender-based violence and abuse of children and women also was a factor which, should be ranked very high when it comes to human rights violations.
Yes, absolutely. We noticed, especially with the Legal Resources Center being a law clinic, the increase of telephone calls and the legal assistance required by the LRC to assist those who have been abused in domestically, children being abused. And there's also another issue as well, dealing with access to education. That's another massive human rights violation that's currently taking place in South Africa. With the gender-based violence, it has escalated to such a point that it becomes incredibly difficult as a law clinic to even handle the amount of complaints that we get on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis.
Police brutality and the manner in which law enforcement officials conduct themselves is also another factor that came under the spotlight recently, of course, looking at Mthokozi Sintumba. But right at the beginning, when the lockdown was still being effected and enforced, we learned of Collins Khoza, who allegedly died in the hands of law enforcement officials. What does how does that resonate and reflect with the human rights and legality of aspects in South Africa?
Absolutely. I mean, we all know in South Africa, everybody has a right to protest. Everybody has a right to demonstrate. And during COVID-19, the police took it upon themselves to obviously not adhere to those rights which are granted to every citizen in South Africa. And that just, again, I keep using the word exacerbated people's rights to their civil and political liberties to such an extent that people were killed, to such an extent that people have been, we've all seen the videos of people being removed from their houses in a violent and degrading way. So from that perspective, the LRC again, trying to intervene where it can, again has noticed a significant increase of police brutality, police abuse, which we try and obviously assist as far as we can. But again, we're a law clinic, and there's only so many complaints and acts of injustice that we can take on.
And, we know that as South Africa marks Human Rights Day today, there's a theme, the year of Charlotte Maxeke, of course, just trying to highlight the significance of this bold woman who made tremendous strides in her life. But it brings us then to the issue of women's rights in South Africa. Of course, we know, touching really briefly, you spoke about gender-based violence. And we know that the police minister, government officials have been very vocal, noting that complaints continue to increase when it comes to gender-based violence. So speaking about a period last year, March the 27th to March the 31st, during the lockdown, where the numbers really shot up, speaking to the deep-rooted problems when it comes to women's rights and the challenges that women face.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, people have the notion that there's equality in South Africa, and it's clear that that's incorrect. There's women in all aspects of society, whether it's at the work, at home, are continuously being oppressed and abused on a significant level. I mean, we have had many gains in South Africa when it comes to human rights, but I think one of the areas where we have failed continuously is you know, the rights of women in South Africa, and making sure that they are on the equal playing field as the counterpart, you know, from the men's side. And I think, you know, South Africa needs to take a stand and listen to itself and start taking serious actions. And this requires a commitment from government, from police forces, which I believe, you know, maybe there's a resource issue at one point, but the police and other enforcement agencies are obviously not taking this as seriously, or cannot take it any further due to resources, or just not willing to actually find this as a systemic problem and actually put in a policy that can actually effectively deal with women's rights in South Africa.
Another big topic that was very central, especially right at the beginning when we learnt of COVID-19 and the non-pharmaceutical interventions that needed to take place, washing of hands, and of course then questions were raised in some communities that didn't have access to water on how they would be able to handle you know, reducing the effects and curbing the impact of COVID-19 within their communities. Access to water, also a huge factor when it came to the impact of COVID-19 reflecting on human rights.
Again, absolutely. I mean, what's even worse is that just before the pandemic was declared a national disaster, there was already a disaster of drought in South Africa. A lot of people didn't know. So we, at one point, we actually had two national disasters running concurrently, which obviously made it all that much more difficult when you have a drought to try and provide access to water. There was various policies and regulations that were put in place immediately to try and give emergency water to various communities. But just to highlight two examples, the Eastern Cape and in Limpopo, the communities over there were essentially getting water not on a weekly basis, but on a basis when government decided they had the resources to now actually deliver water for a week, and then the communities would be left without access to water for another 3 to 4 weeks and would have to essentially find water on their own. And of course, as we know, when it was lockdown level 5, you were essentially not allowed to leave your home. So immediately when you're trying to find water to make sure you are, that you can try and wash your hands, and obviously water being a commodity that's needed for life itself, had a significant impact on various communities. You know, that coupled with the fact that jobs were lost at a much more rapid rate during COVID, you find often people not having access to water, not having money to go and buy water, are left essentially on the wayside. And of course, it had a massive impact in terms of trying to curb the spread of COVID in South Africa.
And as we perhaps just close things off, Lucien, when it comes to the importance of today and the theme that's being reflected on Human Rights Day, what do you think are still, you know, perhaps some of the challenges and gains that can be made during this time when it comes to really reflecting and introspecting on a significant day such as this?
Absolutely. And I mean, the biggest gain that I think we need to start looking at is giving access to education to all students, and not just access to education, but quality education. I think if we can start developing systems and technologies and put those in place so that all children, not just in affluent areas, can get access to internet, to technologies, allow them to learn from past experiences and to get involved with the curriculum at a much higher level, that would be a really good step moving forward, and that could be potentially a massive gain. But of course, we've got a very long way before that can be implemented in South Africa. It needs a lot of resources from government, and obviously the buy-in from government. And then, of course, we all know after COVID-19, the world itself is not going to be the same. And we need to start moving towards what we believe, should be a more just equality state in South Africa. And that, I think, is potentially maybe the only positive thing we could think about when we want to try and move forward and make sure that human rights are actually developed in line with the aspirations that we believed we could be achieved in 1994.
Very well. Thank you so much for your time.